It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. And the fact that she waited until there were 6 other people in the room before she said it. That's the part I keep coming back to. We were at her colleague Cassandra's place in Petone, one of those big villas on the hill with the harbor view that looks better in photographs than it actually feels in person, all drafts and original sash windows that haven't sealed properly since 1962. There were 8 of us around the dinner table. Her workmates, mostly. People I'd met once or twice at functions. The kind of people who ask what you do and then stop listening about 4 words in. My partner, I'll call her Deidre, because that was her name, had been with me for 3 years by then. We'd talked about getting married. Not seriously talked, not ring and date talked, but the kind of half-serious conversations you have on Sunday mornings when everything feels possible and neither of you is quite ready to stop imagining. I was 62. She was 54. We weren't children. We knew what we were doing, or I thought we did. The dinner started fine. Roast lamb, which someone had slightly overcooked, but nobody said anything because the wine was good and the harbor was going pink in the evening light. Cassandra's husband, a quiet man named Gareth, who seemed most comfortable when he was refilling glasses, kept the conversation easy. We talked about the recent council elections. Someone brought up the new development on the waterfront. Someone else had opinions about the ferry service. I was relaxed. I remember that specifically I was relaxed in a way I hadn't been in months, because work had been demanding, and the drive down from Upper Hutt had been smooth for once, and the lamb, slightly dry as it was, tasted like a Sunday evening was supposed to taste. Then Cassandra asked Deidre something about a project at work, and Deidre was answering. And then one of the other women at the table, Moira, I think, who worked in the same department, leaned forward with a slight smile and said, "And what about your partner? What does he do?" A natural question. Perfectly ordinary. Deidre glanced at me. Then she looked back at Moira with an expression I hadn't seen before, a small lift at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smirk, but not quite. Not one either. "Oh," she said. "He works for the council. Processing building consents." The way she said processing. The slight pause before it. The tone that made it sound like something you'd scrape off the bottom of a shoe. Moira nodded politely. Someone else changed the subject. Deidre moved on as if she hadn't just described the work I'd done for 28 years, as though it were something a trained monkey could manage between naps. I didn't say anything. I smiled, picked up my wine glass, and listened to someone tell a story about a holiday in Queenstown. But something had shifted inside me. Quietly, cleanly, the way a lock turns when the right key is finally used. Not in anger. Anger is loud and immediate, and I've never been particularly good at it. More like a settling, like something that had been slightly uncertain had just become very clear. I drove us home that night, up through the dark hills, and Deidre talked about the dinner the whole way. What Cassandra's renovation had cost. Whether Gareth seemed happy. What she thought of the new manager who'd started in February. She was cheerful. Animated. Completely unbothered. She never mentioned what she'd said. I didn't bring it up. Some things are better understood quietly. Let me tell you a bit about what I actually do. What I'd been doing since 1996, when I joined Wellington City Council as a junior consents officer at the age of 34, having spent my 20s doing contract drafting work, and my early 30s realizing I wanted something with more structure, more long-term meaning. More of a sense that what I did on a Tuesday afternoon mattered to something larger than a client's quarterly figures. Processing building consents sounds, I'll admit, exactly as glamorous as Deidre made it sound. It does not get the heart racing. Nobody's making a film about it. When I tell people at parties what I did, I watch their eyes go politely flat, and I've long since stopped minding. But here's the thing about building consents in a city like Wellington. Everything gets built through them. Hospitals, schools, the apartment block your adult child moves into, The earthquake strengthening that determines whether a building comes down or stays up when the ground moves. I spent 28 years being one of the people who made sure those decisions were made correctly, documented properly, and stood up to scrutiny. I reviewed code compliance. I managed a team of 12. In my last 6 years, I was the senior technical manager for the residential consents division, which meant that nothing of consequence got approved or declined without coming across my desk at some point. I was not, by any measure, rich. The council pays what the council pays. But I was respected in my field, and I had spent the better part of 3 decades building something real. Deidre knew all of this. We had talked about it many times, which is why the processing still sat in my chest like a stone 3 days later, when I was eating lunch alone at my desk and looking out at the harbor and finally letting myself think clearly about what it had meant. She was embarrassed by me, not in the private way that couples sometimes are, the gentle cringe when your partner tells the same story for the 4th time, the affectionate eye roll. This was something else. This was public calibration. She had looked around that table at people whose opinions mattered to her, and she had measured me against them and found me wanting, and she had said so in the gentlest possible way that allowed her to deny she'd said anything at all. I sat with that for a long time. Then I opened my email and sent a message to an old colleague named Murray who had, about 6 months earlier, left the council for a consulting firm that did infrastructure compliance work for local bodies across the South Island. He'd asked me twice if I'd be interested in joining. I'd said I was settled in Wellington. Comfortable. I told him I might be ready to reconsider. Murray called me that afternoon. We talked for 40 minutes. The role he had in mind was a senior compliance advisory position, based primarily in Christchurch, but with travel across Canterbury and Marlborough. The pay was, I'll be honest, considerably better than what I was currently earning. The work would draw directly on everything I'd built over the past 3 decades. He needed someone with my exact background. "How soon could you move?" he asked. "Give me a month," I said. "Maybe 6 weeks. I hung up and sat quietly for a while. Then I went back to work. Because there were 4 consents on my desk that needed reviewing, and they weren't going to review themselves. That evening I cooked dinner. Deidre and I had a routine where I cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She cooked Monday and Wednesday, and Friday was takeaways from the Thai place in town. I made a pasta bake. She talked about a difficult client. I asked the right questions and listened to the answers, and at no point did either of us mention Petone. This was how the next several weeks went. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't playing a game. I wasn't planning some elaborate performance of normalcy designed to make the eventual reveal more dramatic. I was simply doing what I have always done. When something important is happening in my life, I was taking my time. I was thinking. I was making sure I was certain before I acted. Because at 62 years old, I have learned, at some cost, that decisions made in the heat of hurt feelings tend to create more problems than they solve. But I was also, quietly and systematically, getting my life in order. I contacted my landlord about the house we were renting in Upper Hutt. Deidre's name was on the lease. Mine was not. That had been a practical arrangement when we moved in together 18 months earlier, because she'd been the one with the established Wellington connections and I'd been newer to the city. It meant, practically speaking, that leaving was logistically simpler than it might otherwise have been. I called my daughter. She lives up in Hamilton with her family, and we speak most Sundays, and I told her, in general terms, that I was considering a significant change. She knows me well enough not to push for details before I'm ready to give them. She said, "As long as you're all right, Dad." I said I was more than all right. I started making lists. What was mine? What was shared? What would need conversation? And what could simply be packed? I had, over the years, developed a talent for the administrative side of life, for the careful organization of transitions that had served me well in the consents office and would serve me here too. I did not approach this with drama. I approached it the way I approach a complex consent application. Methodically, thoroughly, one item at a time. I found a flat in Christchurch, a decent one. Actually a 2-bedroom unit in Maryvale, close to the kinds of things I care about. Walking tracks, a good library, a Saturday farmer's market. I paid the bond and the first month's rent in early April. I booked a moving company for the last Saturday of the month. I told Deidre none of this, not because I was being cruel, but because she had already made a decision about who I was and what I was worth. And I didn't owe her the chance to revise that opinion before I'd finished acting on it. There were moments, in those weeks, where I almost said something. Not out of weakness, I don't think that's what it was. More out of habit. We had been together 3 years. We had a life of small shared things, the Saturday market in Petone, the particular mug she used every morning, the way she always fell asleep first, and the house went quiet. I would look at those things sometimes and feel their weight, but then I would remember the dinner table, the slight pause before processing, the way she hadn't mentioned it afterward, not even obliquely, not even a sorry if that came across wrong. Nothing, which told me she hadn't thought twice about it, which told me something more important than any single comment could, that she had assessed me, quietly and privately, a long time before that dinner table. The comment was just the moment it came out. I kept going to work. I kept cooking Tuesday and Thursday dinners. I took her to Martinborough one weekend for a wine tour she'd been wanting to do, because the booking was already made and I saw no reason to cancel it. She was happy that weekend. She held my hand in the second vineyard and said she was glad we'd come. I smiled and meant it, in the way you can mean something and also know it is the last of its kind. My last day at the council was a Friday in late April. They did the usual thing, morning tea in the break room, a card signed by the team, a gift voucher for a local bookshop that I thought was genuinely thoughtful. My manager, who had worked alongside me for 11 years, shook my hand and said, "You've left this place better than you found it." I don't embarrass easily, but I nearly did right then. I drove home and began loading the car. Deidre was at work. I had timed it that way, not vindictively, but practically. Having her present would have required a conversation I wasn't ready to have in the middle of a moving day. I took what was mine. I left what was hers. I left a note on the kitchen table. The note said, "I've taken a position in Christchurch. I left this morning. I wish you well, and I mean that sincerely. I've arranged for the rest of the month's share of the rent to be transferred to your account. Take care of yourself." I didn't say I was sorry. I wasn't. I drove to the ferry terminal. The crossing was smooth. The Cook Strait was calm in a way that felt slightly unreal, the kind of glassy afternoon you get maybe 4 times a year when the wind drops and the water goes flat and silver and the South Island appears out of the haze like something you'd been told about but never quite believed. I stood on the deck and watched the North Island get smaller. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt, mostly, clear. The particular kind of clearness that comes when a long uncertainty finally resolves itself. I'd been in Christchurch for about 3 weeks when my phone rang with a number I recognized. I didn't answer. She called again an hour later. Then, sent a message. "Please call me. I want to talk." I read it, put the phone face down on the kitchen bench, and went for a walk along the Avon River. It was an autumn evening, the leaves coming off the willows in slow spirals, the light doing that low Canterbury thing, where everything goes amber and long-shadowed and slightly unreal. I thought about whether I owed her an explanation. I decided I probably did, not because I felt guilty, but because she deserved to understand what had happened. And I am, at heart, a straightforward person who doesn't enjoy leaving things unresolved if there's a better option. I called her back the following morning. "Where are you?" she asked. "Your stuff is gone," the note said. Christchurch. But I thought, I'm in Christchurch, I said. I've taken a position with a consulting firm. I started 10 days ago. A silence? You didn't say anything. No, I said. I didn't. Why? I thought about how to answer that. Not because I didn't know I knew exactly, but because I wanted to say it correctly. Without cruelty. Without score settling. Just the truth. Plainly. The way I'd have presented a complex consent decision to a council committee. At Cassandra's dinner, I said, "You described what I do, what I've done for 28 years, as though it were something slightly beneath you. And the thing that mattered to me wasn't the comment itself. It was that you said it easily, as though it was just an established fact between you and your colleagues. As though you'd already decided." Another silence. Longer. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. "I know," I said. And I did know. That's the thing. She probably hadn't sat down and made a deliberate decision to demean me. It had just slipped out. Naturally, the way things slip out when they represent what we actually think. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know that too," I said. "But you didn't not mean it either." And that was the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Can we talk properly? Could you come back for a weekend? Or I could come to—" "I don't think so," I said. "Not right now. Maybe not at all. I need some time to let things settle." "Are you angry at me?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Not angry. I just understand something now that I didn't understand before. And you can't unknow something once you know it." She started to say something else. I told her gently that I needed to go. I thanked her for calling. I meant it. I hung up and made a cup of tea and looked out the window at the Merivale Street. Quiet in the morning. A man walking a dog. A kid on a scooter. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday in a city where nobody knew my name yet. Which felt, mostly, like a gift. That was 14 months ago. I'm not going to tell you I'm thriving in the way people perform thriving when they tell stories like this. I don't go to the gym every morning, and I haven't taken up surfing, and I'm not dating anyone remarkable. I cook my own meals. I walk the Port Hills on weekends when the weather holds. I've joined a book group at the local library that I pretended for 3 weeks I wasn't going to enjoy, and then did. The work is good. Better than good. Actually, Murray had been right that the role suited me. There's more variety here than I had in Wellington, more technical challenge, and I spend more time out on site than I did in the office, which I've found I prefer. Last month I was in Kaikoura for 3 days, reviewing compliance on a coastal development, and I stood on the seafront watching the sun come off the water and thought, I am 63 years old, and I am exactly where I should be. My daughter came to visit in February. She stayed for a long weekend, and we drove up through Hanmer Springs, and she told me she was proud of me, which made me embarrassed in the good way. Her kids, my grandchildren, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6 video, call me on Sunday afternoons and show me things they've made at school. And that is, when I'm honest, the best part of any given week. Deidre and I have exchanged a few messages since that phone call. Civil ones. She's well, I think. I hope so, genuinely. She's a capable person, and I have no interest in her suffering. I just couldn't be in a relationship with someone who had, without seeming to notice they'd done it, quietly filed me under adequate but not quite impressive enough. Because here is what I've learned. At 63. About respect. It is not something you can negotiate after the fact. It is either there, in the small, unremarkable moments, the dinner table, the offhand comment, the things someone says when they think nothing important is happening, or it isn't. And when it isn't, no amount of "I didn't mean it like that" can put it back. I am not a man who needs to be admired. I have spent my whole adult life doing work that most people don't understand and fewer celebrate. And I have been fine with that. genuinely fine. Because I understood what it was worth even when others didn't. I don't need the people I love to think my job sounds glamorous. I don't need them to brag about me at dinner parties, but I need them to say my name and the thing I do, without a pause that means despite. That's all. That's the whole of it. And when I drove onto that ferry in late April, watching Wellington disappear behind me in the gray afternoon light, what I felt, mostly, was the quiet satisfaction of a person who had finally, clearly, understood his own worth and decided to act accordingly. I've been asked, since telling this story to a few people I trust, whether I regret not saying something, whether I wish I'd confronted her at the table, or on the drive home, or in the weeks that followed, whether the silence was a kind of cowardice dressed up as dignity. It's a fair question. I've turned it over honestly, but I've come to think that not every wrong thing deserves a confrontation. Some things are better answered by what you do next, by who you choose to be in the years that follow, by the life you build quietly, methodically, one good decision at a time, in the space that opens up when you finally stop making yourself smaller than you are. And if I learned anything from 28 years of building consents, it's this. The foundations matter most. What you can't see, what nobody at the dinner table will ever think to ask about. The work done carefully, in unglamorous rooms, by people who showed up and did it right. That work holds everything else up. It always has. It always will. I've thought a lot, in the months since I left Wellington, about the word quiet. How it gets mistaken for weakness. How a person who doesn't raise their voice at the dinner table, who doesn't fire back with something sharp, who simply smiles and reaches for their wine glass, how that person gets read, sometimes, as someone who didn't notice, or didn't mind, or simply didn't have the spine to respond. Deidre made that mistake. I don't say that bitterly. I say it plainly, the way I'd state any fact I've had enough time to examine properly. What she didn't understand, what I think a lot of people don't understand, until something like this forces the question, is that quiet isn't the absence of a decision. Sometimes it is the decision, the most considered one available. I spent 28 years doing work that required precision and patience, and a willingness to care about things nobody else at the table thought were worth caring about. That doesn't make me exceptional. It makes me someone who learned, over a long time, that the value of a thing is not determined by how loudly it announces itself. The foundations of every building in that city were reviewed by people whose names nobody knows. The work held anyway. That's a principle I've come to believe in deeply, not because someone taught it to me, but because I lived it. In unglamorous rooms, for the better part of 3 decades, what you do with integrity, even when nobody is watching, even when nobody thinks to ask, it accumulates. It becomes something real. When Deidre paused before the word processing at that dinner table in Petone, she wasn't just being careless. She was revealing something she'd already decided. That the visible markers of a career, the title, the salary, the story that sounds good at a dinner party mattered more to her than the substance underneath. That's not a moral failure. It's just a mismatch. But it's a fundamental one. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't pretend otherwise. Here is what I believe about cause and effect, stripped of anything mystical. The choices we make about how to treat people, especially in the small, unremarkable moments when we think nothing important is at stake, those choices have consequences. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because people are paying attention, even when they look like they aren't. Especially then. I paid attention. And then I acted. Not in anger, but with the calm that comes from finally understanding a situation completely. That's what I'd call intelligence, in the practical sense. Not cleverness, not education, but the willingness to see clearly and respond honestly. Even when the honest response is inconvenient or slow, And the courage it takes to do that, to quietly dismantle a life you'd half built with someone, to book a flat in a city where nobody knows you, to drive onto a ferry with your whole life in the back of the car, that courage doesn't look like anything from the outside. It looks like paperwork, like logistics, like a man who seems very calm about something that ought to be upsetting. But it is courage, all the same. The kind that doesn't need an audience. I'm 63 now. I walk the Port Hills on weekends. I have a role I'm proud of, and a daughter who visits and grandchildren who show me their school drawings on Sunday afternoons. I don't have everything, but I have my own honest estimation of myself, intact. And I've stopped placing that in someone else's hands to hold. That, I think, is the whole lesson. Know what you're worth, not arrogantly, but accurately. And then live accordingly, whether or not anyone at the dinner table notices.